to go along with our Harry Potter movie day, I thought it would be a fun idea to do some Harry Potter themed activities for our Facebook page. So to start off with, I'm going to be reading you the first chapter of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, this big old illustrated edition I have. The Harry Potter series is written by J.K. Rowling, and the books are published by Scholastic. And if you have not read them before, what have you been doing for the last 20 years? And also, they're very, very good, and I encourage you to give them a shot. So here we go. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal, thank you very much. They were the last people you'd expect to be involved in anything strange or mysterious because they just didn't hold with such nonsense. Mr. Dursley was the director of a firm called Grunnings, which made drills. He was a big, beefy man with hardly any neck, although he did have a very large mustache. Mrs. Dursley was thin and blonde and had nearly twice the usual amount of neck, which also came in very useful as she spent so much time craning her head over the garden fences, spying on the neighbors. And the Dursleys had a small son called Dudley, and in their opinion, there was no finer boy anywhere. The Dursleys had everything they wanted, but they also had a secret, and their greatest fear was that someday somebody would discover it. They didn't think they could bear it if anyone found out about the Potters. Mrs. Potter was Mrs. Dursley's sister, but they hadn't met for several years. In fact, Mrs. Dursley pretended she didn't have a sister because her sister and her good-for-nothing husband were as un-Dursleyish as it was possible to be. The Dursleys shuddered to think what the neighbors would say if the Potters arrived in the street. The Dursleys knew that the Potters had a small son too, but they'd never even seen him. This boy was another good reason for keeping the Potters away. They didn't want Dudley mixing with a child like that. When Mr. and Mrs. Dursley woke up on the dull, gray Tuesday, our story starts. There was nothing about the cloudy sky outside to suggest that strange and mysterious things would soon be happening all over the country. Mr. Dursley hummed as he picked out his most boring tie for work, and Mrs. Dursley gossiped away happily as she wrestled a screaming Dudley into his high chair. None of them noticed a large tawny owl flutter past their window. At 8:30, Mr. Dursley picked up his briefcase, pecked Mrs. Dursley on the cheek, tried to kiss Dudley goodbye but missed because Dudley was now having a tantrum and throwing his cereal at the walls. "Little tyke," chortled Mr. Dursley as he left the house. He got into his car and backed out of number 4's drive. It was on the corner of the street that he noticed the first sign of something peculiar. A cat reading a map. For a second, Mr. Dursley didn't realize what he'd seen. Then he jerked his head around to look again. There was a tabby cat standing on the corner of Privet Drive, but there wasn't a map in sight. What could he have been thinking of? It must have been a trick of the light. Mr. Dursley blinked and stared at the cat, and it stared back. As Mr. Dursley drove around the corner and up the road, he watched the cat in his mirror. It was now reading the sign that said Privet Drive. No, looking at the sign. Cats couldn't read maps or signs. Mr. Dursley gave himself a little shake and put the cat out of his mind. As he drove toward the town, he thought of nothing except a large order of drills he was hoping to get that day. But on the edge of town, drills were driven out of his mind by something else. As he sat in the usual morning traffic jam, he couldn't help noticing there seemed to be a lot of strangely dressed people about. People in cloaks. Mr. Dursley couldn't bear people who dressed in funny clothes, the get-ups you saw in young people. He supposed this was some stupid new fashion. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, and his eyes fell on a huddle of these weirdos standing quite close by. They were whispering excitedly together. Mr. Dursley was enraged to see that a couple of them weren't young at all. Why, that man had to be older than he was, and wearing an emerald green cloak? The nerve of him. But then it struck Mr. Dursley that this was probably some silly stunt. These people were obviously collecting for something. Yes, that would be it. The traffic moved on, and a few minutes later, Mr. Dursley arrived in the Grunnings car park, and his mind was back on drills. Mr. Dursley always sat with his back to the window in his office on the 9th floor. If he hadn't, he might have found it harder to concentrate on drills that morning. He didn't see the owls swooping past in broad daylight, though people down the street did. They pointed and gazed open-mouthed as owl after owl sped overhead. Most of them had never seen an owl, even at night time. Mr. Dursley, however, had a perfectly normal, owl-free morning. He yelled at 5 different people, he made several important telephone calls, and shouted a bit more. He was in a very good mood until lunchtime, when he thought he'd stretch his legs and walk across the road to buy himself a bun from the baker's opposite. He'd forgotten all about the people in cloaks until he passed a group of them next to the baker's. He eyed them angrily as he passed. He didn't know why, but they made him uneasy. This lot were whispering excitedly too, and he couldn't see a single collecting tin. It was on his way back past them, clutching a large donut in a bag, that he caught a few words of what they were saying. "The Potters! That's right, that's what I heard. Yes, their son, Harry." Mr. Dursley stopped dead. Fear flooded him. He looked back at the whisperers as if he wanted to say something to them, but he thought better of it. He dashed back across the road, hurried up to his office, snapped at his secretary not to disturb him, seized his telephone, and had almost finished dialing his home number when he changed his mind. He put the receiver back down and stroked his mustache, thinking, no, he was being stupid. Potter wasn't such an unusual name. He was sure there were lots of people called Potter who had a son called Harry. Come to think of it, he wasn't even sure that his nephew was called Harry. He'd never even seen the boy. It might have been Harvey or Harold. There was no point in worrying Mrs. Dursley. She always got so upset at any mention of her sister. He didn't blame her, if he'd had a sister like that. But all the same, those people in cloaks. He found it a lot harder to concentrate on drills that afternoon, and when he left the building at 5 o'clock, he was still so worried that he walked straight into someone just outside the door. "Sorry," he grunted, as the tiny old man stumbled and almost fell. It was a few seconds before Mr. Dursley realized that the man was wearing a violet cloak. He didn't seem all that upset about being almost knocked to the ground. On the contrary, his face split into a wide smile, and he said in a squeaky voice that made passersby stare, "Don't be sorry, my dear sir, for nothing could upset me today. Rejoice, for you know who has gone at last. Even muggles like yourself should be celebrating this happy, happy day." As the old man hugged Mr. Dursley around the middle, he walked off. Mr. Dursley stood rooted to the spot. He had been hugged by a complete stranger. He also thought he'd been called a muggle, whatever that was. He was rattled. He hurried to his car and set off home, hoping he was imagining things, which he'd never hoped before, because he didn't approve of imagination. As he pulled into the driveway of number 4, the first thing he saw, and it didn't improve his mood, was the tabby cat he'd spotted that morning. It was now sitting on his garden wall. He was sure it was the same one. It had the same markings around its eyes. "Shoo!" said Mr. Dursley loudly. The cat didn't move. It just gave him a stern look. Was this normal cat behavior? Mr. Dursley wondered. Trying to pull himself together, he let himself into the house. He was still determined not to mention anything to his wife. Mrs. Dursley had had a nice, normal day. She told him over dinner all about Mrs. Next Door's problems with her daughter, and how Dudley had learned a new word, shan't. Mr. Dursley tried to act normally. When Dudley had been put to bed, he went into the living room in time to catch the last report on the evening news. And finally, bird watchers everywhere have reported that the nation's owls have been behaving very unusually today. Although owls normally hunt at night and are hardly ever seen in the daylight, there have been hundreds of sightings of these birds flying in every direction since sunrise. Experts are unable to explain why the owls have suddenly changed their sleeping pattern. The newsreader allowed himself a grin. Most mysterious. And now over to Jim McGuffin with the weather. Going to be any more showers of owls tonight, Jim? "Well, Ted," said the weatherman, "I don't know about that. But it's not only the owls that have been acting oddly today. Viewers as far apart as Kent, Yorkshire, and Dundee have been phoning in to tell me that instead of the rain I promised yesterday, they've had a downpour of shooting stars. Perhaps people have been celebrating bonfire night early. It's not until next week, folks, but I can promise a wet night tonight." Mr. Dursley sat frozen in his armchair. Shooting stars all over Britain? Owls flying by daylight? Mysterious people in cloaks all over the place? And a whisper about the Potters. Mrs. Dursley came into the living room carrying 2 cups of tea. It was no good. He'd have to say something to her. He cleared his throat nervously. "Petunia, dear, you haven't heard from your sister lately, have you?" As he expected, Mrs. Dursley looked shocked and angry. After all, they normally pretended she didn't have a sister. "No," she said sharply. "Why?" "Funny stuff on the news," Mr. Dursley mumbled. "Owls, shooting stars, and there were a lot of funny-looking people in town today." "So?" snapped Mrs. Dursley. "Well, I just thought maybe it was something to do with, her lot." Mrs. Dursley sipped her tea through pursed lips. Mr. Dursley wondered whether he dared tell her he heard the name Potter. He decided he didn't dare. Instead, he said as casually as he could, "Their son, he'd be about Dudley's age now, wouldn't he?" "I suppose so," said Mrs. Dursley stiffly. "What's his name again? Howard, isn't it?" "Harry. Nasty common name, if you ask me." "Oh, yes," said Mr. Dursley, his heart sinking horribly. "Yes, I quite agree." He didn't say another word on the subject as they went upstairs to bed. While Mrs. Dursley was in the bathroom, Mr. Dursley crept to the bedroom window and peered down into the front garden. The cat was still there. It was staring down Privet Drive as though it was waiting for something. Was he imagining things? Could all this have anything to do with the Potters? If it did, if it got out that they were related to a pair of... Well, he didn't think he could bear it. The Dursleys got into bed. Mrs. Dursley fell asleep quickly, but Mr. Dursley lay awake, turning it all over in his mind. His last comforting thought before he fell asleep was that even if the Potters were involved, there was no reason for them to come near him and Mrs. Dursley. The Potters knew very well what he and Petunia thought about them and their kind. He couldn't see how he and Petunia could get mixed up in anything that might be going on. He yawned and turned over. It couldn't affect them. How very wrong he was. That's chapter 1 of Harry Potter. I hope you have enjoyed it. And we'll get into some other activities here in just a minute. So stay tuned for those. One of the most well-known foods in the Harry Potter universe is butterbeer. You can actually get this if you go to like Universal Studios. They have a big Harry Potter section, and they sell their butterbeer, and it's really, really popular. I don't think this is the same recipe. If you want to follow along at home, the ingredients you'll need: 4 cans of cream soda, a 1/4 cup of butterscotch syrup, 1 cup of heavy cream, 2 tablespoons of sugar, 2 teaspoons of pure vanilla extract, and a 1/4 cup of melted butter. I googled butterbeer recipe, and this is the second one that came up. So first step, in a large bowl, we're going to combine cream soda and butterscotch syrup and stir it together. I have bottles of cream soda. Casey's brand cream soda. I'm sure they'll work just fine. Now this is slightly less than 4 cans worth. But we're already filling up the bowl. Next we need our butterscotch syrup. Now I'm not measuring exactly. I'm just using what's left in this bottle, because it was probably about the right amount. But since this isn't an actual food from the real world, we can use however much we want. Alright. Delightful. Alright, it's stirring time. It's like sizzling. I guess fizzing would be the right word, wouldn't it? It's almost like magic. Alright, so now we got a sort of lighter, foggier looking liquid going on. So let's see what we have to do next. We're going to take our heavy cream, which I have measured out here, dump it in, and now children, do not do this next part at home on your own, because you will die. So, we're going to take our mixer here, and just ever so carefully. Alright, I'll assume that's what that means. It's all bubbly now. It's bubbly. What's next? Alright, we're folding in our sugar and our vanilla. How much sugar do we need? We need 2 tablespoons of sugar. Okay, 1 and 2. 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. Something you can do at home is just take a big old swig of this vanilla though. It'll taste great. It smells great. It'll taste great. 1. Well, I spilled a little. And 2. Cool. Alright, let's stir again. Now we gotta add in our melted butter. Bloop. I'm gonna take a little artistic liberty and add some milk, because it looks like it needs some more something. I'm also gonna mix it some more, because I don't think it's quite mixed all the way. Well, it's looking interesting. I don't know if that's good. but we're gonna try it. Kira! Kira! It's kind of a strange color. You're supposed to put whipped cream on the top, but we don't have any, so.
It's good. Just kind of like a slushy now.
Yeah. It's chunky. This is try number 2. I added some more cream and made it less bad. And now we're going to try it again. So, here we go. Oh, that's way better. That's way better. Enjoy your butterbeer, everybody, if you decide to make it. So another very important part of the Harry Potter universe is getting sorted into your Hogwarts house. That all the characters in the Harry Potter universe who are magical get sorted into either Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, or Slytherin. Gryffindor's where all your brave people are at. That's where Harry's at. Hufflepuff is really loyal and hard-working people. Ravenclaw's for if you're really, really smart. And Slytherin is if you're a bad guy. No, I'm just kidding. Slytherin is if you're ambitious or cunning are the words they use. So I have taken this sort of test many a time before. I already know where I fall, and I promise you I'm going to have absolutely no biases going into this whatsoever. None at all. I swear to you. So, let's go ahead and get started. Let's see what we have first. This is from BuzzFeed. So I've made it into Hogwarts, which means that I've already bought a wand from Ollivander's. What material is at its core? And in the Harry Potter universe, at Ollivander's wand shop, you can have either a phoenix feather, dragon heartstring, or unicorn hair. Now, phoenix feathers are super, super rare. I feel like I'm more of a dragon heartstring guy myself. Dragons are really awesome. During the end-of-year exams, you notice that one of your classmates was using an enchanted quill. You come on top of the class anyway, but they are second. What do you do? Now, immediately my thought is just stay out of it. It's not my problem, so let's see if that is an option down here. Tell the professor immediately. Nope. Nah, none of these. I don't like any of these. Well, this is essentially doing nothing, so we'll go with that one. You would be most hurt if a person called you weak, ignorant, unkind, or boring. I think I'm gonna go with ignorant. I like being informed, you know? You're locked in a duel with a skilled opponent. They fire an unknown spell at you and you shout. See, this is the bad guy answer. This is the spell that makes people get hurt, and that's the spell that's going to give me Slytherin. I'm fully going into this aware that I'm probably not going to get Slytherin because BuzzFeed is just going to be like, are you a bad person? Then you're in Slytherin. I'm going to go with unknown spell, Stupefy. It's your 5th year at Hogwarts and you've just received a howler from your parents. What is it for? Sneaking into the Forbidden Forest, getting caught cheating, being put in detention after I was caught in the library after hours, or nothing. I'd never do anything to warrant a howler. I'm a good boy. I've never done anything to warrant a howler. Which of these Dumbledore quotations speaks to you? I have a Dumbledore quotation on a t-shirt, actually. I don't think it's going to be on here, probably. Doo-doo-doo. Ooh, I like this one. It does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live. I like that. Which of these most accurately describes your relationship with your closest friends? No, I do not love surrounding myself with people at all. This one? Yeah. Yeah, we'll go with this one. Which of your skills are you most proud of? My ability to absorb new information. My guess is that I'm going to get Ravenclaw in this quiz, but I refuse to accept that because I have Slytherin merchandise, and yeah. First Quidditch match of the season is approaching, and you can't wait to get involved. What role? I'm not playing. I am not playing in the game. Sure, I'll be in the crowd. Why not? You're allowed a pet at Hogwarts. I feel like an owl in the Harry Potter universe is really useful. I'll go with an owl. It's Saturday and you've finished your homework and you have some free time. You decide to go get some time away from the common room. Where do you go? Room requirement. That'd be really cool. Room requirement is a room that shapeshifts into a different room depending on what exactly you need it for. I think I like that. What would you see in the Mirror of Erised? The Mirror of Erised is at the first movie. It's the mirror that shows you the deepest desire of your heart. So what do I want the most? I want to be knowledgeable, you know? I want to know everything. Choose a Deathly Hallow. Deathly Hallows is the last book in the series, and they are the Elder Wand, which is the most powerful wand in the world. The Resurrection Stone can bring people back to life, and the Cloak of Invisibility can make you invisible. These two are pretty much useless, because you can just do it all with the Elder Wand, so... Which path do you intend on following after leaving Hogwarts? I think I'm going to do this bottom one, just work to achieve success. I don't know what I want to do exactly. And finally, we know the Sorting Hat takes your preferences into account, so which house do you most closely identify with? Slytherin. I am... Ooh! That's close. 33% Slytherin, 32% Ravenclaw, 22% Gryffindor, and 13% Hufflepuff. Very, very interesting. Not what I was expecting, to be perfectly honest, but I am very glad that my Slytherinness is still intact. So I hope you've enjoyed all of our Harry Potter activities that we've done, and feel free to go ahead and search up some tests or make some butterbeer or read the books yourself. So I hope we see you in here for our last week of summer reading, and I will see you soon.